Hello and welcome to today's Brookbanks podcast. My name is Katie Glaze. I'm Director of Sustainability here at Brookbanks, and the subject of today's podcast is climate change adaptation in the built environment. And I am really excited to introduce my two guests today, Pantelis and Mark. If I could ask you both to do a quick introduction and a little bit about yourselves.
Hello from me. I am Pantelis Levantis from Greece. I am the founder and managing director of Ecoveritas. We operate as a sustainability consultancy company, implementing also BREEAM certification in Greece and another two countries in Italy and Cyprus.
Hi, I'm Mark Standen and I'm a key account manager at BRE. I've been a sustainability consultant for over 20 years. I'm a certified passive house designer, BREEAM assessor, BREEAM AP, and have been carrying out energy modelling, overheating analysis for many years.
Brilliant. Thank you both. So let's dive in. The UK has seen numerous heat waves this year already, and I think it's fair to say that that's caused some disruption, whether it be in homes, schools, hospitals. So my starting question to you both is the UK ready?
I think not. Speaking from a personal experience, having to put up silver material outside my son's bedroom during the last heat wave, which helped to a certain extent. But yeah, we're really struggling to get rid of that heat in the evening, particularly when the nighttime temperatures aren't dropping sufficiently low to reduce those temperatures. So yeah, speaking from personal experience, I think everybody can vouch for that.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, isn't it, between what we've perhaps experienced in the past is that we're not getting that nighttime cooling that perhaps the UK building stock has relied on so far. Pantelis, what's your take going on in the UK at the moment?
Though I'm not an expert, of the UK market and industry, what I can deduce is that since UK is a northern country, where it sits in Europe, I mean, definitely the infrastructure is not there in order to tackle heat waves. I mean, a logical human can make this a deduction. So I don't believe that the UK is ready for heat waves. I mean, by history, uh, it's something that you have to adapt and challenge within the coming years, given that the tendency of global climate is to rising temperatures. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very easy to focus on sort of the new builds. Is there anything that you think that we should be focusing on in terms of the existing building stock? That, is there any lessons that we can take from the more southern European countries like Italy and Greece that we can start using now to sort of help us ride these out?
Well, definitely we do have more experience by history regarding how to deal with rising temperatures and heat waves. Being a fabric first advocate, I would say the most important thing uh, in order to tackle rising temperatures and heat waves is to seal the fabric first and specifically encourage bioclimatic architecture, meaning, and that is a very important detail, having some external shading. This is something very well known in the history of the southern countries. It's the first thing to do, keep out the heat.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think Mark and I can probably attest this that the likes of external shading and brise is still seen as quite novel in the UK. I mean,
Yeah,
it was a BREEAM credit for many years, so it's certainly not part and parcel.
yeah.
Um, do you think that there's sort of certifications? Is there methodologies that we could be employing now when we're looking at our new builds to make sure that we do factor these in?
Well, speaking as a certified passive house designer, I'm going to be waving the flag for passive house, which really encourages the use of external shading in the right way and in the correct facade and orientation. But we really need to be normalising the use of external shading. We just don't do it in the UK enough. If you go into northern France and similar latitudes to Devon and Cornwall, there's external shutters, external shading everywhere. But we're just not doing it enough here. So, like I said, we really need to be normalising the use of external shading.
That leads really nicely onto sort of the retrofit side of it. Mark, obviously passive house is a new build scheme. Well, how do we address the existing? I mean, I'm thinking about, minimizing the stocks of tinfoil running out. And being a Dorset resident, I can confirm shading is not something that's on many of our houses here. We don't have those shutters. What can we be doing now? What's a quick win, do you think, in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem, especially when you're talking about heritage buildings, listed properties, conservation areas where, external shading is not an option. So, you really need to be looking at all options in terms of utilizing the thermal mass. A lot of these older buildings do have the benefit of having high thermal mass. Um, Potentially, if it's possible, to use secondary glazing with some solar control film, and obviously utilizing night purge ventilation. But again, that's not always going to work when we see temperatures in the high 20s overnight, as we've seen recently. So it's really trying to get those small wins from lots of different areas. But there's no one silver bullet, unfortunately.
Pantelis, if we were able to correct the building fabric approach, how does the UK building stock differ from, say, Greece or Italy in terms of their ventilation strategies? Is it wildly different? Are there things that we could be taking on and learning from?
One non-technical issue I think that we have to put in the discussion is the ownership, because in Greece, what we are experiencing is that we have many building blocks of flats that they have, for example, 20 to 30 different owners. That is a problem when you want to tackle the fabric. There are many people, as I said, as owners, and it's difficult to come in a decision. So there is a social challenge initially. The technical is slightly easier, but on the other hand, as Mark said, for example, we have some limitations regarding listed buildings. But then again, probably these are not the main percentage of the in-use building stock. The disadvantage of sort of intervening with the building fabric is that it can be costly. When, for example, we compare this uh, with the sign of the times decarbonization, which is a different thing of moving into more efficient building services. But then again, since I am always a fabric first approach, there are different methods that we can shield the building fabric. As I said before, for example, one very easy alteration is to change the exterior colors. This is something well known in Greece. For example, in the islands, in the Greek islands, if you see, all houses are white. We should avoid dark paintings on the exterior. That makes a big difference. And we have also a massive industry of the so-called cool products, paints, cooling paints. That's an easy thing to do and change. But then again, that has to do with history and aesthetics uh, in each country.
That's a really interesting point. I think if you walk around, particularly any city in the UK, there is a lot of sort of grey, black cladding. We do tend to have a much darker color palette. Red brick buildings, for example. We very rarely find those sort of pale renders or pale cladding that could make a difference. That's a really interesting point. when we're looking at sort of future proofing our buildings in terms of sort of design standards and certification, we've touched on BREEAM and passive house. When we're actually looking at the modelling, do you think that goes far enough? So with the likes of TM59 and Part O, CIBSE have recently updated their weather files for 2080. And so, we should be designing sort of climate resilience in there. Is that enough? Should we be looking at it a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, they're providing methodologies and the future climate scenarios, but what we need to remember is that those future climate scenarios are averaged out, so they're not looking at those really extreme spikes like we experienced recently. Um, they're providing an average scenario. So it could be argued that they're not going far enough because they're missing out on those spikes. But by the nature of providing a predicted future climate scenario, it is leveling out the curve. So it will be missing some of those spikes.
It's a tough one to call, isn't it? Because you don't want to. I think there's a danger of over specifying, and I
Exactly.
think particularly sustainability professionals, we've perhaps been talking around these issues for, well, Mark and I, we've definitely been talking together about this for about 20 years now, which is horrifying. But and I think there is always the knee-jerk reaction to go for the most extreme. So
Yeah.
yeah, I see. CIBSE have to go for the best case. And
Yeah.
in terms of circling back to sort of BREEAM, as they push the boundary more, do you think there's an opportunity for certification methods if BREEAM lead well, the likes of them, to sort of push this further to cope with those extremes?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing needs to be remembered is that those certification schemes, yes, that they're voluntary. They're not, well, voluntary to a certain degree. They are being mandated, in some local plans or planning conditions. But they're essentially providing uh, a direction of travel rather than a shield. So perhaps a compass rather than a shield. So pointing design teams in the right direction of considering these very important aspects. Not just climate change adaptation, but resource use and all the other aspects that all of the schemes cover. It's pushing design teams to consider these important subjects without necessarily providing that absolute certainty that the building will, cope with these extreme temperature spikes.
Yeah. Pantelis, in Greece, obviously you've been a key player in the Sustainable Building Council of Greece. Do you have a different way of approaching climate change in terms of design?
Not really. Actually, Glaze operates under the EPPD, the Energy Performance Building Directive, and is customized because this is a European directive and is customized for Greece. Now, there is sort of, for example, if we take the BREEAM International V7 scheme, which is the newest one, that definitely the energy, for example, assessment and efficiency for V7 is according to our energy performance building directive. That is, it uses the EPCs. I wouldn't say that BREEAM goes too far. I think it sits fine. It's okay. And as Mark said, and rightly, it sets the context under which you're going to assess how the building is going to operate. I would say it was mentioned before by Mark and you about the passive house. We have to put an asterisk here and remember that passive house was invented by Germans, and initially it was for the northern European buildings that they have very harsh winters and very, very, very mild summers. Now, looking on the Mediterranean zone, we have an inverse climate. Our challenges are during summer and not in winter. Therefore, when we're thinking about passive house, for example, in the Mediterranean zone, we have to think that common practices, even that go back to the 1950s, which is night purging, cross-flow ventilation, and external shading, initially they were not designed within the system of the passive house. So, uh, thinking in terms of passive house in the southern region, okay, it's fine, but it's different from the northern European countries. I would say BREEAM, just to answer the question, sits well. Um, the approach, it's the one that is used throughout the industry because this is the Greek regulation. I don't find it very strict. I mean the benchmarks, but the important thing is that BREEAM is within the right European context regarding energy efficiency, and that's very helpful when we are applying energy assessment through the BREEAM scheme.
We've, for so long, the main focus has been reducing the heat loss in winters, and with retrofitting a passive house, or making making buildings more energy efficient, has tended to be speaking about heat loss in the winter. So we've been focusing on making buildings more airtight, having more insulation, and essentially trapping that heat into the building. And obviously, we now need to start thinking of the inverse, for part of the year. Obviously, we still need to do that in the winter, but we now need to think about how we're going to be rejecting that heat and stopping the heat entering the building in the first place. Um, so we do need to start looking at, we've spoken already about external shading, but incorporating things like deep balconies, moving away from flush facades, and without any external shading. So there's definitely lessons that we can pick up from Southern Europe and bring to Central Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Nordics, where they are experiencing, extreme heat as well.
It's a real 180, isn't it, on where we thought we were. It's now heat loss in summer that we need. Who'd have thought? You mentioned sort of Nordic countries, Mark. Obviously that, you know, being Finnish. What lessons do you think that we could be taking from the approach there?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said before, a lot of the houses, speaking from a Finnish experience, a lot of the buildings are really well insulated, really airtight, using MVHR. It's very normal to utilize all of those kind of passive house style measures. Um, and I do worry that there is, in the UK, when we're talking about Part O and designing buildings to reduce risk of overheating, that there is starting to be a bit of an over reliance on MVHR for mitigating overheating risk. And I think that's perhaps come from a bit of a misconception that MVHR is going to be providing cooling. It doesn't. When we've got these temperatures at night, in the high 20s, the MVHR is still pushing that warm air into the building at night. MVHRs are doing a great job in the summer when the outdoor temperature is below the indoor temperature. That's when it's at its most effective at reducing overheating risk. But like I said, with those high temperatures in the evening and overnight, the MVHR isn't going to be providing that cooling effect that some people purporting it to be doing. So we need to be careful with understanding what those measures are doing and how and what they are capable of doing.
Yeah, and I think obviously passive house leans heavily into the MVHR route. And there's been a lot of discussion over the use of air conditioning units as well, particularly in domestic scale recently. What's your take on that? Obviously, it increases the operational energy demand of a building.
Yeah, as Pantelis said, you've got to look at the building itself first. So making sure that the building can cope as far as it can in terms of passive measures, and then there will be some scenarios, there will be some buildings that are unable to maintain temperatures in extremes, and we can then start to look at a small amount of active cooling onto the MVHR system when we know that the MVHR can't be dealing with those extreme temperatures for that particular context of a certain building.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a challenging time because it sounds for half the year we need to design like a Nordic country, and the other half of the year we need to be looking to the Mediterranean and designing there. And we're in this really interesting band. Obviously, our neighbours, Northern France, are also experiencing, extreme temperatures. Our building stock, our existing building stock, is going to prove challenging. In terms of adapting that, particularly when you're looking at those heritage buildings and instilling fabric first approaches. There's obviously Enefit that can address that in terms of sort of the fabric first approach, but I do wonder how much we can actually do. Slightly different approach. Pantelis, socially, is there different approaches to the workday? It's been discussed a lot on LinkedIn recently about whether we should be working through the sort of peak temperatures. Is there a different approach socially to sort of climate, internal climates in Greece?
I would say our civil protection department here in Greece, normally what they do is that after 32 or 33 Celsius degrees, they issue sort of banning work externally. For example, working in construction sites and all of this kind of stuff. But not yet we haven't seen, even if the temperature goes to 35, 36, even 40 degrees Celsius, uh, regarding all internal work, like in offices, uh, there are no bans. That might seem to you a little bit strange, but we have already adapted as humans to this kind of temperatures when we are within the buildings, because I would say most of the buildings, even if they are commercial or residential, now in Greece, they do have air conditioning. I mean, this is something pretty standard when you travel down south. So not as strict as you would imagine when the whole society, has started to adapt. Um, so I think the big question is how frequent in the UK, for example, you are going to experience this kind of heat waves that we have experienced because I was in London as well during this week. How frequent this event is going to become? That's a big question, and a worry. If it's something, for example, like every 6 or 8 months, maybe it's not that, of a big issue in order to change the whole infrastructure. It's a matter of how recurrent this event is, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think going back to my school days, we used to watch the thermometers in the classroom because there was a rumor that if it went over 30 degrees, we could all go home. And as far as I know, we never reached that during my youth. But it's something that my children have definitely experienced. As soon as it goes over, we all disappear. We did experience construction sites being shut down, which is generally, by and large unheard of. But a site that I'm familiar with was shut down earlier this year due to heavy snowfall and ice being a danger. And the same site has now been shut down to excessive heat as well. So it's definitely something that our industry needs to start factoring in, and start factoring in during programming of works. Um, do local councils need to be more mindful of sort of noise restrictions as well, allowing people to work earlier in the day, particularly in construction, perhaps finishing later at night when it's less extreme in those temperatures. Is there anything that I think, Mark, this is probably one for you. Is there anything that you think that the UK planning policies need to start factoring in? I think climate change adaptation studies have been seen as a bit of a nicety. Is that something that we should be looking at more?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough consideration taken into local plans for overheating. You do see some, particularly London boroughs, that have to abide by the London plan, that do have to consider overheating and cooling strategies. But outside of London, there's not enough local plans from local authorities that are mandating the consideration. I just happened to be looking at some local plans earlier this week, and some of them just don't have any mention of overheating or cooling. So, having to rely on building regulations on Part O, which, it's great that there is now a specific building regulation for overheating, but local authorities with their local plans really need to start focusing and mandating consideration of overheating in the cooling hierarchy.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also something that sort of large portfolio owners that perhaps aren't going through planning, they might not have any new builds or refurbs coming up, but in terms of resilience for existing properties, that we've got a number of institutions in the UK, whether it be the NHS, the DfE, who have got a significant, and private holders as well, who've got a significant portfolio. Do you think there is a benefit of existing portfolio owners looking at their portfolio and seeing what can be done in terms of a planning sense?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of talk about de-risking buildings for portfolio owners. That if they've got to be looking at the safety and the comfort of the occupants of the buildings that they own and operate. So it's absolutely something that all stakeholders within the construction industry and the built environment need to be taken account, because not only is it a comfort risk, but also a safety risk, as we saw with increase in numbers of people being admitted to hospital because of heat stress. So it's a very real risk for building portfolio owners.
Yeah, it's certainly a very challenging time in the UK industry at the moment for people who are designing and also as portfolio owners. One thing we haven't touched on is the increase in storm activity as well. So the other side of this is, yes, heat wave now, but in the winter we've definitely seeing stronger winds, and that's done significant damage to properties, especially when you're looking at cities that have got wind tunnel effects. That it's become more and more common, and that in itself I think provides a different challenge. And I think the UK, as is fairly typical for the UK, we seem to have found ourselves into a bit of a boiling pot where we've got extremes in all. We've got strong winds, areas are getting heavy snowfall, and very cold temperatures in the winter, but then you go 300-400 miles away and they're in a mild winter with low winds, and then in the summer you've got lovely 20 degrees, which for me is perfect. But then in the other extremes you've got internal temperatures hitting 35-40, and we've got this real interesting challenge that one island has got a Finnish climate for part of the year, and then it's got a Greek climate and then the rest of the time we sit in the middle. So it's like we've said with that modeling, where do you put the parameters in? Is it a case of we just have to accept that we're going to be uncomfortable for certain points in the year? or do we try and address everything?
I think we'll struggle to deal with every single scenario. Like we were saying, that that's partly why the CIBSA TM59 are averaging out the future climate scenarios.
So we all just need to be uncomfortable for a bit. Or split our time between Finland and Greece.
Right.
That's the other option.
I think the bottom line is to do what is socially acceptable and viable when we come to scale, when we move to scale, and talking about societies. I mean, there's no other way. Um, and this is what we have learned in Greece, as I said before, with earthquakes. You cannot really plan and design and seal the building for an 8 Richter earthquake that will return in 500 years or 1,000 years. It doesn't make any sense. Um, so, yes, I think, and we have to be also calm. I believe on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's how you respond to those extremes, because we don't have precedent for a lot of these. It for us, certainly in the UK, I think at the moment it's feeling quite horrible, really. I didn't attend Climate Action Week because of infrastructure problems, and then the schools closing, and we're not we're not socially prepared for them yet. So hopefully there'll be some lessons learned from this. We are aware that schools will shut, that hospitals, a peer of ours had, his daughter had her operation cancelled due to extreme heat in the operating theatre, and it's our responsiveness and acknowledgement to the situation that I think we're not ready for. We're not used to it. It is an extreme, and I think perhaps we could be looking to the likes of Greece, Pantelis, and acknowledging that you are perhaps more ready to deal with it socially as well. Thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been a great discussion, and one I'm fairly sure that we could carry on for an awful lot longer as well. To everybody that's listening, we will see you next time for the next podcast. Thank you very much.